A single dad stepped up to the checkout counter with nothing but a pack of diapers. His very last coins rattled softly in his hand. He counted them one more time, but before he could speak, a calm voice from behind said, "I'll take them all. You're still short by 87 cents. The cashier's words had already stung. They broke through the steady hum of the supermarket like cold water splashed across his face. Jack Carter froze mid-motion. His hand hovered above the counter, holding out every cent he had left. 3 quarters? A nickel? A few dull pennies rubbed smooth by years of use. Behind him, his daughter Emma started to cry. It wasn't the sharp, angry kind of cry. It was the weary, hungry cry that cut deeper, the one that seemed to echo in silence and made everyone else uncomfortable. She sat strapped into a faded plastic cart, her small legs kicking uselessly, her cheeks red from heat, sticky crumbs clinging to her face from a half-eaten cracker. Jack forced a tired smile. "Can you take the wipes off?" he asked, his voice thin. "You didn't buy wipes," the cashier answered, her eyes never leaving the glowing screen. "Oh." Jack's shoulders dropped. Of course he hadn't. There was only one item on the conveyor belt, a single pack of off-brand diapers. Size 3. That was all he had come for. All he could afford, or so he thought. He dug deeper into his other pocket, pulling out 2 dimes and a bent penny. He counted again. Then again. Still. Short, behind him, a man muttered just loud enough for Jack to hear. "Shouldn't have kids if you can't afford them." Jack didn't turn. He crouched down beside the cart, pretending to fix Emma's blanket. His hands searched his coat pockets for something. Anything. His fingers met nothing but old receipts and lint. Then, just when hope was thinning, he felt the edge of a quarter. He pulled it out with cautious triumph. But as he did, another penny slipped loose, clinking on the tile before rolling in a slow, mocking circle beneath the cart. Jack sank lower, his knees aching against the cold floor. He reached for the runaway coin. Above him, Emma's little fingers brushed his hair as she whimpered, watching him. He gave her a small smile, whispering, "Almost, baby. Almost." The people behind sighed loudly. One shifted noisily. The tension grew thicker, pressing on him from every direction. Jack stood again, gripping the rescued penny like it was gold. He placed it carefully on the counter. Every single cent mattered. But the cashier only raised an eyebrow. "Still 87 short," she said flatly. Jack's mouth opened, then closed. His pride cracked. He was about to say the words he dreaded most, put the diapers back. And then it happened. A clear, steady voice from behind him. "I'll take them all." Jack turned, startled. The woman who spoke stood with quiet composure. She looked no older than her early 30s, tall with soft blonde curls falling over her cream-colored coat. She held a small basket. Baby food, a stuffed giraffe, a bottle of organic shampoo. She stepped forward, placing her basket on the belt. Her tone was gentle but firm. "I'll cover his items," she told the cashier. Then she looked at Jack. "Please." Jack blinked. His throat tightened. His eyes moved from her back to Emma, whose cries had faded into small hiccups. The little girl stared wide-eyed at the stranger. The woman smiled at Emma warmly, then turned back to the cashier. "And add a pack of wipes," she added softly. "And some fruit pouches." The cashier glanced between them, then began scanning again without comment. Jack's chest felt heavy, not with shame alone this time, but with a knot of gratitude and disbelief he didn't know how to carry. He tried to speak, but his voice caught in his throat. "The woman lifted her hand, not to hush him, but to gently stop him from saying what he didn't need to. "You don't owe me anything," she said. "She deserves to go home clean and full. That's all." Jack met her eyes, and there it was. Not pity, not superiority, but something else entirely. A quiet understanding. A look that seemed to whisper, "I've been there too." His lips pressed together. He nodded, a silent gesture of respect. Behind them, the line had grown still. Maybe some people still judged. Maybe some now felt ashamed. But none of it mattered. Because in that moment, something rare had happened. A stranger had stepped forward. Not for show, not from guilt, simply because she saw someone worth helping. What Jack didn't know, what he couldn't possibly have guessed, was that this woman had already crossed paths with him once before. And before long, she would again. If you believe the world needs more moments like this, moments of compassion without conditions, tap that hype button. Help us share these stories with hearts like yours. Jack stared at the receipt as the cashier handed it to her. He didn't move. His hand clenched around the shopping bag she had just paid for. Diapers, wipes, fruit pouches, even a small plush giraffe. He felt the weight of each item not only in his bag, but in his chest. Slowly, he turned toward her. His eyes were tired. Not the tired of sleepless nights, but the tired of years spent surviving one day at a time. His gaze locked with hers. "I'm not a beggar," he said finally. His words were not loud, not harsh. They came out low and strained, edged with the rawness of a wound too old to heal. The woman, Evelyn Hart, did not flinch. She looked at him with calm, her eyes carrying something deeper than sympathy. Recognition. "I know," she said gently. "I never thought you were." Jack looked away for a moment, trying to steady his breath. Kindness like this made him uneasy. In his life, kindness always came with strings. He had learned that lesson the hard way. But Evelyn spoke again, her voice quieter this time. "When I was a baby, there were days I had no diapers either. I remember the cold. I remember the smell. I remember the way people looked at my mother when she asked for help." She paused, her eyes steady on his. "So I'm not helping out of pity. I just know the feeling." That stopped him. His eyes lifted back to hers. The hardness in them softened, just for a moment, as surprise flickered across his face. For a beat, neither spoke. Then Emma's laugh broke the silence, her little fingers reaching toward the stuffed giraffe sticking out of the bag. Jack turned slightly to steady the cart, then looked back at Evelyn. Something in him had shifted, even if only a little. "Thank you," he said softly. She smiled, not a wide, dramatic smile, just enough to say, "You're welcome." Jack turned the cart and walked toward the automatic doors. They slid open with a quiet sigh, letting the cool evening air rush in. He pushed Emma slowly toward the parking lot, his mind still replaying the moment. At the edge of the lot, beside a row of clearance bins, Jack paused. He reached into the bag and pulled out one item, the red fruit pouch Evelyn had asked to add. Strawberry and banana. Organic, shiny, too expensive for him to feel right about. He stared at it for a long second. Then, with quiet care, he walked back inside and placed it on the impulse shelf by the register. He kept the diapers, the wipes, the giraffe, because Emma already clutched it tight. But the snack? That was more than they needed. Jack had a rule. Take only what you cannot give back. Outside, he strapped Emma into the car seat of his old, dented pickup. The truck smelled faintly of motor oil and worn leather. Emma babbled, humming to herself, waving the giraffe like a trophy. Jack slid behind the wheel and sat there for a moment. He hadn't expected help tonight. He certainly hadn't expected her. He glanced into the rear-view mirror. Emma giggled at her own reflection. Jack exhaled, a long breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. He didn't even know her name. She hadn't offered it. He hadn't asked. Yet her face stayed with him, calm, kind, familiar in a way he couldn't place. He turned the key. The engine coughed once, then caught. As the truck rolled out of the lot, Jack whispered under his breath, almost too soft to hear, "I'm not a beggar." And for the first time in years, he almost believed it. High above the city, the view from the 32nd floor of Heart Baby headquarters stretched across a skyline of glass and steel. Morning sunlight poured over towers Evelyn Hart had helped shape, but her office? Silent. Evelyn stood at the window of her office, the city stretched out in steel and glass below, her fingers turning over the same small silver locket she had held for years, the chain thin and frayed, the metal dulled by time but alive in her memory, and she opened it again as she always did, staring at the shaky letters etched inside, J. Carter, a name that had carried her through nightmares, a name bound to fire and smoke, a name she had never stopped whispering in her heart. And when a knock broke the silence, and Margaret, her faithful assistant, entered with a stack of board reports, she barely turned, and Margaret's eyes caught the locket and softened as she said, "You're holding that again." And Evelyn managed a faint smile. "Do I always do that?" And Margaret answered, "Only when you're thinking about the fire." And after a long silence, Evelyn admitted, her voice distant, "I dreamed about it last night, like I always do, back when I was 7, when the orphanage was crumbling and smoke filled every hallway. They said it was an accident, but I never believed them. Most of the children got out, but I didn't. I was upstairs, the smoke thick. I crawled under a bed. I couldn't breathe. I thought it was over. Then the door was kicked in, and a boy, 10 maybe, in a dirty jacket, came through the smoke, threw this locket over me, picked me up and whispered, 'I got you. You're safe now.' And he carried me out into the night. But no one ever found him. No file. No name. The firefighters thought he must have been a street kid. All I had was this locket that slipped from his neck when he saved me." And she held it up between her fingers as Margaret nodded gently and said, "You've been searching ever since." And Evelyn whispered, "Not in public, not in words, but in my heart. Yes, I never stopped." That afternoon she went, as she often did quietly, to Hope and Hands, the nonprofit she funded without fanfare, a place that gave diapers, food, and comfort to single parents. And as she moved through the distribution desk, her eyes fell on a man standing there, signing a clipboard with grease still staining his jeans, boots worn thin, posture steady as stone, a toddler in his arm giggling and clapping her little hands. And Evelyn froze, because it was the baby from the supermarket, Emma. And the man turned, and their eyes locked, and something unexplainable passed between them. Something like recognition or memory. And Evelyn stepped closer, her voice calm but edged with surprise. "I didn't expect to see you again." And Jack nodded once. "Neither did I, but thank you. Emma's doing better." And Evelyn looked at the child and said softly, "She's beautiful." And Jack answered, "We're just here for diapers. They said they restock Thursdays." And Evelyn's lips curved faintly. "I know. I fund this place." And Jack blinked, taken aback, nodding slowly. And Evelyn hesitated before asking, "Do you Still work on cars, and Jack tilted his head. Yeah, side jobs when I can, mostly cash. And Evelyn told him, we have vans at Heart Baby, always breaking down. If you're interested, I could set up a contract, flexible hours, fair pay. And Jack's eyes narrowed, suspicion flashing. Because I'm broke. And Evelyn shook her head, her voice softer. No, because you're capable, because you're honest, because you deserve a chance. And Jack shifted Emma to his other arm, weighing her words before saying, I'll think about it. And she smiled lightly. That's all I ask. And he walked away, leaving her standing still with her pulse racing as she glanced down at the locket in her hand and whispered, J. Carter, wondering for the first time in years if the boy who saved her might somehow be back. Soon, Jack was working in the garage behind Heart Baby's warehouse, a place with oil-stained concrete, flickering lights, battered tool chests, and delivery vans in constant need of repair. And for the first time in years, he had a rhythm, arriving. Early each day, with Emma strapped against his chest in a second-hand carrier, the child soothed to sleep by the steady rattle of wrenches and ratchets, and Jack tracked every repair carefully, stretching every part, never padding hours, never. Lying, always honest, and people noticed, especially Evelyn, who one Thursday walked into the garage unannounced, the sharp smell of motor oil rising around her, her heels clicking softly as she crossed the bay, and she saw Jack crouched beside a van, sleeves rolled, grease staining his forearms, while Emma sat in the hollow of an old tire, giggling and waving, a piece of brake line like a wand, and Evelyn smiled. Is that safe? And Jack looked up quickly. No fluid, she's fine, just... And he paused with a small smile at Emma, just testing her lunar landing gear. And Evelyn stepped closer to see Emma surrounded by makeshift controls, two small wheels like a cockpit, tubing tied into a pretend horn, and Jack explained, she said she wants to go to the moon, so this is her training module. And Evelyn laughed, not politely, not forced, but freely, a sound so unguarded that Jack felt something stir in him, something he hadn't felt in years. The warmth of hearing genuine laughter again. A week later, the air was different. No laughter, only panic. As Jack stood outside the garage pacing, Emma limp in his arms, her cheeks flushed, her forehead burning, and his voice cracked as he told Evelyn, she's burning up. I was going to take her to the clinic, but my truck won't start. And Evelyn, without a thought, opened her car. Get in. And Jack climbed in, holding Emma close. The ride silent, except for the child's weak whimpers, as Evelyn drove fast, but careful. And at the clinic, she filled out the forms while Jack refused to let go of Emma, until the doctor explained it was just a fever, not dangerous, but enough to shake any parent. And later on, the bench outside, Jack whispered, thank you. His voice low, rough, deeper than gratitude, and Evelyn did not smile, only nodded. You're welcome. And Emma rested on his chest, breathing softer now, and Evelyn murmured, you're a good father. And Jack lowered his eyes. I'm trying, and Evelyn told him, that's all it takes, and something shifted quietly between them. Weeks passed, and Evelyn returned often with excuses, new parts, new schedules, but lingered longer than needed, while Jack began saving Emma's funniest moments to share with her. How she danced to the compressor's hum, how she unraveled, paper towels like treasure. And Evelyn laughed more, stayed longer, and Jack found himself listening for her footsteps, while Evelyn, who had long trusted no one, found herself waiting for his simple morning. And in that grease-scented garage filled with small joys and soft thank yous, a friendship grew. Not because they were broken, but because, for the first time, they felt seen. But then everything shifted with a photo. A grainy snapshot taken on someone's phone, a moment outside the family center when Jack fumbled with the car seat straps, and Evelyn had lifted Emma into her arms with ease, smiling as the child laughed. A moment innocent and private, until it was posted online. And by morning it was everywhere. Headlines screaming, "Billionaire CEO cradles poor man's baby." Is it compassion or a stunt? Rich woman, poor baby. Evelyn Hart plays savior. CEO exploits. Single dad to rebrand humanity into her company. Some praised, most mocked. Talk shows speculated. Trolls attacked. Even investors questioned. And Evelyn read every word silently from her office, scrolling through endless streams of venom, her phone buzzing with Margaret, reporters, crisis managers begging for a statement. But she closed her laptop and walked to the window, staring at her reflection. Polished, controlled, successful. Yet inside she felt again, like that little girl trapped in smoke, unseen and alone. While across town, Jack, under the hood of a van, wiped grease from his hands and picked up his buzzing phone, reading article after article until Evelyn's name, dragged through mud, hit him in the chest like blows he could not block. Emma's photo spread across the internet, her tiny face plastered on screens for strangers to judge, and Jack stood frozen in the garage, fury boiling in his chest, not because they had stolen his image, but because they had twisted Evelyn into a villain, using Emma as their weapon. And without thinking, he dropped the wrench, wiped his hands on his jeans, and stormed toward the main building. The receptionist's hesitation meaningless when he demanded in a voice that brooked no argument, "I need to see Evelyn now." And 2 minutes later, the elevator opened onto the executive floor, where Evelyn sat with makeup faintly smudged. At the corners, eyes heavy as if she had rubbed away tears she didn't want anyone to notice. And when he entered, shutting the door firmly behind him, his words came fast and raw. "You don't have to take this alone." And she blinked, whispering, "It's fine." But he snapped back, "No, it's not. They're dragging your name through the mud, using me, using Emma." And she turned her face away, insisting, "It will pass." But Jack shook his head, voice sharp, "That doesn't mean you have to let it." And silence pressed between them until Evelyn exhaled, her voice trembling, as she admitted, "I'm not crying because of the headlines. I'm crying because, for once, someone spoke up for me." And Jack faltered, speechless, until she lifted her eyes, shimmering with unshed tears, and confessed, "When I was a kid, I used to dream that someone would stand between me and the world, just once, not because they had to, but because they wanted to." And Jack swallowed hard as she finished, "You just did that," her voice cracking as the walls she had built for years began to crumble. And when he muttered, "I didn't do anything special," she countered softly, "You showed up, and that's more than most ever did." And for a long moment they stood there, two people who had spent years carrying their own weight, finally realizing they did not always have to. And while outside, the city roared with scandal and gossip, inside that quiet office Evelyn Hart felt safe for the first time in years. The next morning, the mail brought an envelope tucked between an overdue utility bill and a flyer for discount tires, and Jack nearly tossed it aside until he saw the Heart Baby logo printed at the top, tearing it open with a calloused thumb to find a letter on thick cream paper, signed in blue ink, offering him the position of logistics operations manager, full-time with benefits, a start date flexible, a role not as a mechanic or temp worker patching vans between diaper runs, but as a leader, a manager, someone trusted. and he sat on the couch staring at the letter in his lap, its weight far heavier than paper, staring at Emma curled on the floor with her giraffe toy and a blanket still carrying a trace of Evelyn's perfume, wanting to say yes, but hearing the old voices whispering, "You are not qualified. You are not that man. They will find out who you really are." And with a deep sigh, he folded the letter back into its envelope and tucked it aside. That evening he stayed late at the garage, shut off the lights, locked the doors, and drove home slowly through light drizzle, the wipers tapping a steady rhythm as the sky turned an unforgiving gray. And back in his small apartment, he was spooning food into Emma's mouth when the knock came, soft but steady. And when he opened the door, Evelyn stood there, her blonde curls damp from rain, her cream coat clinging to her shoulders, a thick navy blanket folded in her arms lined with soft white fleece, and she held it out, saying only, "For Emma." And Jack stepped aside silently to let her in, the modest apartment glowing warmly under a single lamp, and Evelyn bent down, draping the blanket over Emma, who reached for it with a smile, clutching it close as Jack lingered awkwardly by the counter until he finally said, "I got your letter." And she answered calmly, "I figured you did. You didn't have to come." And he muttered, "I know." Then, after a pause, admitted, "I'm not sure I can do that job." And Evelyn looked at him for a long moment before walking toward him slowly, carefully, like approaching someone carrying invisible wounds. And she reached for his hand, her voice soft but steady. "Jack, don't walk away from someone who believes in you." And his throat tightened as he whispered, "I've made mistakes." And she nodded. "So have I. I dropped out of college, never finished half the things I started. But you raised a child alone, you fix what's broken, and you show up, and that counts for more than anything." Jack blinked hard, fighting the sting in his eyes, admitting in a low, uncertain voice, "I'm not used to this, someone seeing more than what's on the surface." And Evelyn squeezed his hand and whispered, "I see you." And something inside him finally broke, his head lowering as long-buried tears slipped free, silent but unstoppable, as though they had waited years for release. And Evelyn stepped closer, wrapping her arms firmly around him, holding him steady, and refusing to let go. And for the first time in so long, Jack Carter let someone share the weight he had carried alone. And when the rain outside finally eased, and Evelyn moved toward the door, he whispered two words that shifted everything. "I'm in." The city glimmered below like a restless sea of glass and light, but Evelyn Hart was not watching it, because she sat alone on the rooftop terrace of Hart Baby headquarters, the wind tugging loose curls across her face, her coat forgotten on the chair behind her, and in her hand was the old silver locket, scratched, dulled, its edges worn smooth from decades of being held. And when she opened it gently, the faint letters inside stared back. J. Carter. The single proof she had carried. For 20 years, the single tether to a night of smoke and fire, and a boy's voice she had never forgotten. And she thought again of how often she had wondered if she would ever find him, ever thank him, ever know if he had been real. And that night, she finally sent a message to Jack. "Can you meet me on the rooftop tomorrow morning? There's something I need to ask." And his reply came quickly, simple and sure. "Sure, I'll be there." When the sun was just breaking the horizon, Jack stepped onto the rooftop, breath visible in the cool air, his jacket zipped halfway, faint, streaks of grease still across his sleeves as if he had come straight from the garage. And Evelyn was already waiting, her arms folded loosely, her eyes fixed on him, and after a long pause, she asked, "Jack, what's your full name?" And he blinked and answered, "Jack Carter." And she reached into her pocket and held the locket out on her palm, asking softly, "Does this look familiar?" And Jack's brow furrowed as he stepped closer, his face shifting the moment he saw it, his hand lifting to pick it up carefully, opening it and murmuring with disbelief, "I haven't seen this in over 20 years. This was mine. My mom gave it to me when I was little." And then his eyes lifted to hers, confused. "Where? Did you get it?" And Evelyn's voice was almost a whisper as she told him, "There was a fire at my orphanage. I was trapped upstairs. I couldn't breathe. I thought I was going to die." And Jack's eyes widened as memory flickered back. "I remember that fire. I lived nearby, saw the smoke, ran over. Someone shouted there was still a girl inside." And his words trailed off as he stared at her. "You?" And Evelyn nodded, eyes shining as she said, "You kicked the door in. You were just a boy. You threw your jacket over me and said—" And Jack finished the line, whispering, "I got you. You're safe now." And her breath caught as she whispered, "You were him. I never knew who you were." And Jack, still stunned, said, "All I knew was that you were scared, and I had to get you out." And Evelyn lifted the locket between them, saying, "And this was still in my hand when they carried me out." And Jack, shaken, reached into his wallet and pulled out a folded, yellowed scrap of paper he had kept all these years, handing it to her. And when she opened it, she saw the rough evacuation list, scribbled in a child's messy scrawl, with the words at the bottom, "Blonde girl, room 14. Saved." And Jack said, quietly, "I kept that ever since. Always wondered what happened to you." And Evelyn couldn't find words, her throat tightening with emotion until finally she stepped closer, leaned her head gently against his shoulder. And though Jack froze, at first he slowly lifted his hand to hold hers, and together they stood there wrapped in silence as the city roared far below, the wind tugging at their clothes, and in that fragile moment it felt as though time itself had paused. And Evelyn whispered, "You saved my life." And Jack answered, just as softly, "And you gave mine back." And she smiled faintly through the blur of tears, murmuring, "Maybe we belonged to each other all along. We just didn't know how to find our way back." And Jack said nothing, only held her hand tighter. And as the morning sun spilled over the skyline, something long lost was finally returned. 1 year later, the garage was gone, replaced by a glass-walled office on the 3rd floor of Heart Baby's operations wing, yet Jack still arrived early every morning, coffee in one hand, toolbox in the other, just in case. And though his title now read Director of Logistics and Community Outreach, to most people he was still simply Jack, the man who showed up, the man who fixed what was broken, the man who finally let himself be seen. In the year that followed, life shifted in ways Jack could never have imagined, as he went from sleeping on a worn-out couch and counting coins at a grocery store to standing at the center of programs that changed lives. His proudest creation being a workshop he named Second Chance, carved out of what had once been the loading docks at Heart Baby's headquarters, now transformed into a bright space he had helped design with his own hands. A place offering free mechanical training, on-site childcare, hot meals, and job placement support for single parents. All the things he had once needed, but never had. And Evelyn had trusted him from the start, telling him, "You know what it should be. Build it your way." And so he did, teaching twice a week as young moms and dads arrived timid and uncertain, and left with oil streaked on their hands, wrenches in their grip, and confidence in their eyes, and in every face Jack saw some part of himself, the man he had been before someone believed in him. That morning, Evelyn stood at the curb outside Emma's preschool. The little girl, now 2, taller, chattier, still inseparable from her stuffed giraffe, and as Evelyn kissed her forehead, Jack walked up, asking gently, "Ready?" And Evelyn smiled, slipping her hand into his, answering, "Always." And they walked back to the car together with no rush, no stress, just steady love carrying them forward. That same afternoon, Evelyn stood at a podium in the new community wing of Heart Baby, a modest crowd of staff, parents, and a few press watching, as cameras clicked softly, and she began, "Today is more than the launch of a charity. It's a promise that no parent should feel alone and no child should go without." Before turning and gesturing toward Jack, her voice warm as she said, "I'm proud to introduce the new CEO of the Second Chance Foundation, a man who knows what it means to fall and rise again, Jack Carter." And the applause rose gently as Jack stepped forward, not in a suit and tie, but in a crisp shirt, carrying quiet strength, and he looked over the crowd before speaking. "I used to think survival was enough, just getting through the day, but someone showed me life is about more than that. It's about being seen, about having someone believe in you when you don't believe in yourself." And then he glanced at Evelyn, adding, "She didn't save me. She stood beside me. And that's what second chances are about, standing beside someone until they can stand on their own." And this time the applause came with misty eyes and nods of recognition. That evening, when the speeches ended and the lights dimmed, Jack, Evelyn, and Emma sat together on a quiet park bench, the sunset bathing the trees in gold, the breeze carrying the clean scent of cut grass, and Emma slept in Jack's arms, wrapped in the same navy blanket Evelyn had once brought them on a stormy night, while Evelyn rested her head on Jack's shoulder, one hand placed on Emma's back, the other curled firmly into his, and they sat in silence that said more than words could, because this was not a fairy tale, not a polished ending, but something better, something real. A father who had almost given up, a woman who had never stopped searching, a little girl who had brought them together, and a second chance that had made them whole. And if this story stirred something in you, reminded you of the quiet strength in kindness, in second chances, then don't let it end here, because there are more stories waiting. Stories of people like Jack, Evelyn, and Emma. Stories that heal and inspire and stay with you long after the screen fades. And somewhere out there, someone is still waiting for hope, for love, for a moment that changes everything. And we can keep that hope alive by sharing stories that matter, stories that stir the soul, stories that bring us closer,